I never thought the day I came home early would be the day my whole world cracked open. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of afternoon where the air smells like dry leaves and wood smoke, and the light turns gold just before it disappears. I had closed the shop 2 hours ahead of schedule. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet decision. I wanted to surprise Laura, maybe make her that lemon chicken she loves, sit on the back porch together and watch the sun go down without saying much of anything. That's the kind of evening we'd built our life around. Simple, steady, earned. I pulled into our street and saw Melissa's car parked out front. I remember thinking, oh, she stopped by to see her mother. That's nice. But the house was too quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel like rest. It feels like held breath. I stepped through the front door and Melissa was standing in the kitchen, her coat still on, her hands clasped in front of her like she was waiting for something. She looked up at me, and for just a moment, just one single moment, something crossed her face that I couldn't name. Then it was gone. "Dad," she said, "Mom's at the hospital." No tears, no trembling voice, just those 5 words delivered like a weather report. I stood there in my own kitchen, sawdust still on my boots, and felt the floor tilt beneath me. "What happened?" I asked. "When? Why didn't anyone call me?" "It happened fast," she said. "I found her. I called the ambulance. She's stable, Dad. She's okay." I didn't wait to hear another word. I drove to St. Michael's Medical Center in 15 minutes flat, running 2 yellow lights and saying every prayer I remembered from 30 years of Sunday mornings. If you've ever walked into a hospital not knowing whether the person you love most is still breathing, then you already know what that hallway felt like. Laura was in the ICU, pale, motionless. Wires and monitors and the slow, rhythmic sound of a machine doing the work her body couldn't. Dr. Harmon, a quiet man with kind eyes, pulled me aside. "Mr. Miller," he said carefully, "we're still running tests, but what we're seeing is consistent with long-term toxic accumulation. This didn't happen overnight." Long-term toxic accumulation. 3 words, and in the space between them, a thought entered my mind that I didn't want to have. Someone did this on purpose. But that was just the beginning of my plan. I served 22 years in the United States Army. I've been in situations where fear was the only honest response, and I've learned, the hard way, that fear and action cannot occupy the same moment. You choose one, you commit to it, and you don't look back. Standing beside Laura's hospital bed that first night, holding her hand while the monitors beeped their steady rhythm, I made my choice. I would not fall apart. I would find the truth. But first, I let myself feel it. Just for those few hours in the dark, I let myself be the husband who was terrified of losing his wife of 38 years. I let myself remember the woman who had married a young soldier with nothing but a duffel bag and a promise. The woman who had raised our children, built our home, and still laughed at my terrible jokes every single morning over coffee. Laura Margaret Miller, 62 years old, the most honest person I have ever known. "She's gonna be okay," the night nurse told me gently, somewhere around 2 in the morning. "I know," I said, and I meant it. But I also knew that okay was no longer enough. I needed to know why, and I needed to know who. I drove home just before dawn. Melissa had gone. The house felt different. Not empty, but disturbed, the way a room feels when something has been moved and placed back not quite right. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I didn't drink and started thinking. Melissa had been coming by the house nearly every day for the past 4 months. That wasn't unusual at first. Laura had been feeling tired, some joint pain, some fatigue, and Melissa had offered to help. She brought groceries, she organized Laura's medications, she cooked dinner twice a week. We had been grateful. I had been grateful. I thought of my daughter, 34 years old, between jobs, recently divorced, and I had thought, she's finally stepping up, she's being a daughter. But now, sitting in the gray light of that kitchen, I began to rewind every memory, every visit, every meal she'd prepared, every supplement she'd encouraged Laura to take.
"Mom, you need to take care of yourself. Let me handle it." How many times had I heard those words? I went to the cabinet where Laura kept her vitamins and supplements. There were 7 different bottles. 3 of them I didn't recognize. No labels from the pharmacy, no prescription numbers, just plain white caps and handwritten names. My hands were very still as I photographed each one. I didn't sleep that morning. Instead, I called Thomas Brecker. Thomas and I had served together for 6 years. After the Army, he'd become a detective with the county sheriff's office. Retired now, but still sharp as a tack and meaner than anyone you'd want working against you. "Ed," he said when I explained what I knew, "I need you to listen to me carefully. Do not confront Melissa. Do not move anything in that house, and get those bottles to me today." "You think this is what I think it is?" I asked. There was a long pause. "I think," he said slowly, "that you need to let me make some calls before either of us thinks anything." That was Thomas. Careful, methodical, everything I was trying to be and failing. That afternoon, I went to the bank. Laura and I had a joint account, a savings account, and a small investment portfolio we'd built over 20 years of careful living. I hadn't checked the statements closely in months. Laura usually handled the household finances. She was better with numbers, and I trusted her completely. What I found in those statements made my stomach drop. Over the past 6 months, there had been a series of small withdrawals, nothing large enough to trigger an alert. $80 here, $120 there, always from the joint account, always on days when Laura had mentioned she wasn't feeling well. And there were purchases, online through Laura's account, for supplements, herbal compounds, and 2 items simply listed as specialty nutritional products from a vendor I had never heard of. The total came to just over $4,000. $4,000 that Laura had no memory of spending, because I'd asked her, gently, before she'd gotten truly sick, whether she'd bought anything online recently. "Not that I recall, Ed," she'd said. "Why?" "No reason," I told her, "just balancing the books." If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. Because the worst part wasn't the money. The worst part was the realization settling over me like cold water, slow, then all at once, that my daughter had been sitting at the kitchen table, looking me in the eye, calling me Dad, and planning something I still couldn't fully bring myself to name.
Thomas called me back the next morning. "Ed, I need you to come over." He lived 12 minutes from my house in a small ranch home with a vegetable garden out back and a police scanner that never went quiet. I found him at his kitchen table with a folder, a legal pad, and 2 mugs of black coffee. "Sit down," he said. He had already started making calls. An old colleague at the county health office, a contact at the pharmacy board, and a friend at the county clerk's office who owed him a favor or two. What Thomas laid out in the next hour was precise, methodical, and devastating. Melissa had, approximately 5 weeks before Laura's hospitalization, visited the county clerk's office and requested copies of several documents, including Laura's will, the deed to our property, and the beneficiary designations on Laura's life insurance policy. "That's not illegal," Thomas said carefully. "Family members can request those records, but the timing matters, Ed. It matters a lot." "Was she listed as the primary beneficiary?" I asked, though I already knew the answer Laura and I had always intended. "She was," Thomas said, "until about 3 months ago." I looked up. "Laura had contacted an estate attorney," Thomas continued. "She'd begun the process of redirecting a significant portion of her estate, roughly 60%, to the Cedarwood Veterans Family Foundation, the local one over on Marsh Road." I set down my coffee mug. I knew about that foundation. Laura had volunteered there twice a month for years. She believed in it deeply, and several months ago she had told me quietly over dinner that she wanted to make it official. "I want to leave something real behind, Ed," she had said, "something that helps people who actually need it." I had told her I supported her completely. Melissa must have found out. I don't know exactly when or how. Maybe she'd overheard a conversation. Maybe she'd gone through Laura's desk when we weren't watching. Maybe Laura had mentioned it directly, not thinking anything of it. but the timeline was undeniable. Laura begins the process of changing her estate plan. Melissa begins visiting the house daily. The supplements appear, the withdrawals begin, and 4 months later, my wife is in intensive care with toxic accumulation in her bloodstream. I sat in Thomas's kitchen, and I felt something go very cold inside me. Not rage, not grief, something older and more dangerous than either. Clarity. "Thomas," I said, "what do I need to do?" He slid the legal pad across the table. "We're going to build a case," he said, "and we're going to do it right." Over the next 10 days, I moved quietly and deliberately. I contacted our estate attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Walsh, and explained everything. She immediately put a hold on all joint accounts and ensured that no changes could be made to any documents without both of our signatures and verification. Thomas connected me with a forensic toxicologist who agreed to review the supplement bottles and compare them against the hospital's toxicology findings. I gathered every bank statement from the past 8 months. I printed every online receipt. I requested the hospital's full intake documentation and the initial lab results, which clearly noted the type and approximate duration of exposure. And I waited. The waiting was the hardest part. Every day I drove to the hospital. Every day I sat with Laura, talked to her, read to her from the old Western novels she loved, and held her hand. She was improving slowly. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, but she was still fragile, still confused on some days, still not herself. "Ed," she said to me one afternoon, her voice thin but clear, "is Melissa all right? She hasn't visited." I kept my face steady. "She's fine, Laura," I said. "She's been busy." It was the hardest lie I've ever told, and it was the only one I told throughout that entire ordeal. If you've ever had to protect someone from a truth that would break them, you know what it costs. I paid that cost every single day. The forensic report came back on a Thursday. I was in Patricia Walsh's office when she read the summary aloud. The supplements had contained elevated concentrations of compounds that, taken consistently over several months, would produce exactly the symptoms Laura had exhibited: fatigue, joint pain, cognitive fog, and eventually organ stress severe enough to require hospitalization. None of it was accidental. These compounds didn't occur naturally in any legitimate health supplement. They had to be added, deliberately, in measured amounts, small enough to avoid immediate detection, large enough to accumulate over time. Patricia set the report down on her desk. "Edward," she said quietly, "I've been doing estate law for 26 years. I've seen disputes get ugly, but this is beyond a civil matter. You understand that?" "Yes," I said. "You need to go to the police." "I know." Thomas had already made the call. A detective named Rourke, young, serious, thorough, had been assigned to the case. We handed over everything: the supplements, the financial records, the toxicology report, the timeline Thomas had assembled, the documentation of Melissa's visit to the county clerk's office. Detective Rourke reviewed everything over 2 days. Then he called me. "Mr. Miller," he said, "we have enough to move forward." I thanked him. Then I hung up and sat in the silence of my woodshop for a long time. I looked at my workbench, the half-finished rocking chair I'd been building for Laura for our anniversary, the smell of cedar and sawdust, the tools hanging in their places, each one where I'd put it. I had spent 40 years building things with my hands, solid things, honest things, and my daughter had spent 4 months quietly trying to destroy the woman I loved for money she hadn't earned and wouldn't have received. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. I didn't cry that afternoon. I think I was too tired for tears. I just sat there, and I let the truth settle into me completely, the way cold settles into wood on a winter night. Then I stood up, washed my hands, and drove to the hospital to be with my wife. 2 days later, Melissa came to the hospital. I had been told she might. Detective Rourke had advised me to act normally if she appeared, to give nothing away, to let her make her own moves. I was in the corridor outside Laura's room when she walked off the elevator. She was dressed carefully, hair done, a bouquet of flowers in her hand, her face arranged into an expression of daughterly concern that 2 weeks ago I might have believed completely. She saw me and stopped. Then she smiled. "Dad," she said, walking toward me, "how is she? I've been so worried. I'm sorry I haven't been by sooner. Things have just been so—" "Melissa," I said. Just her name, nothing else. She stopped talking. I looked at her, really looked at her, the way you look at a person when you're memorizing them, when you know something is ending. "The police are on their way," I said quietly. "They'll be here in about 10 minutes. Her face didn't fall dramatically. It didn't crumble the way faces do in movies. It just went still, like a clock stopping. "What?" she whispered. "Everything has been documented," I told her. "The supplements, the withdrawals, your visit to the county clerk's office, the toxicology report. All of it." She opened her mouth, closed it. "Dad, I don't know what you think—" "Melissa." My voice was steady, quieter than I expected it to be. "Don't." The flowers hung at her side. She looked at them and then at me, and in her eyes I saw something shift, the performance dropping away for just a moment, and what was underneath wasn't guilt exactly. It was something more frightened than that, something younger. But I had learned a long time ago that a person's pain does not excuse what they do with it. Detective Rourke arrived with a colleague at 2:47 in the afternoon. They were professional, efficient, calm. I stood in the corridor and watched them speak to my daughter, watched them explain her rights, watched her hands begin to tremble as the reality of what was happening became impossible to deny. As they walked her to the elevator, she looked back at me once. I held her gaze. I didn't look away. And then the elevator doors closed. I stood there in that hospital hallway for a long moment. The fluorescent lights hummed above me. A cart rattled somewhere down the corridor. A nurse walked past me and smiled without knowing anything. I breathed in, I breathed out, and then I turned and walked back to my wife's room and sat beside her and held her hand.
The legal process took several months. I won't walk through every detail. Some things belong only to lawyers and courtrooms, and the people directly involved. What I will tell you is that the evidence was substantial and the outcome was just. Melissa pled guilty to a reduced charge of criminal endangerment and financial fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and full restitution of the funds taken from our accounts. She would not serve time in a prison cell. The judge took into account her lack of prior record and what he called significant psychological factors. I did not object to the sentence, not because I thought it was enough, but because I had already accepted that justice and satisfaction are not the same thing. Justice is what the law provides. Satisfaction, that kind of peace, you have to build for yourself. The hardest day of that period wasn't in the courtroom. It was the morning I told Laura. She had recovered enough to come home by then, still moving slowly, still tiring easily, but her eyes were clear and her voice was her own. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where Melissa had stood in her coat and told me calmly that my wife was in the hospital. And I told Laura everything. I told her about the supplements, the bank records, Thomas's research, the toxicology report, the arrest. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Laura looked down at her hands, hands I had held for 38 years, and she sat with what I'd told her for a long time. Finally, she said, "How long have you known?" "From almost the beginning," I said. She nodded slowly. "And you never told me." "I didn't want you to have to fight for your life and carry this at the same time." She looked up at me then, and her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Laura is never a person who cries easily. She's always been something tougher and quieter than that. "We lost something," she said, "didn't we?" "Yes," I said, "we did. But we didn't lose each other." "No," I said, "we didn't." If you've ever had to rebuild something precious after someone tried to destroy it, you know that what you rebuild is never quite the same shape as what you had before. But sometimes it's stronger. Sometimes the rebuilt thing holds up better precisely because you know now exactly what it can withstand. That's what Laura and I were doing in the months that followed. Rebuilding, carefully, honestly, together.
Spring came early that year. By March, Laura was walking the neighborhood every morning, bundled in her blue coat, taking the long route past the park. I went with her most days. We didn't always talk much. Sometimes we just walked, and that was enough. The wood shop kept me sane through all of it. There's something about working with your hands, the smell of fresh-cut pine, the particular sound of a plane moving along a grain that keeps you anchored. When the grief got heavy, I went to the shop. When the anger flared back up in the middle of the night, I went to the shop. I finished Laura's rocking chair in February. It was the best piece I'd ever made. I don't say that with pride exactly. I say it because I put everything into it. Every difficult feeling, every hour of sitting with what had happened, every prayer and every curse and every long, quiet mile of just getting through. When I brought it in from the shop and set it on the back porch, Laura sat in it and didn't say anything for a full minute. Then she said, "Edward Miller, this is the most beautiful thing you've ever built." I sat down on the step beside her. "I had a lot of time to work on it," I said. She reached over and put her hand on my arm, and we sat there, watching the yard come back to life in the early spring light. There's a question I've sat with through all of this, one that doesn't have an easy answer. Did I fail my daughter? Not in the way you might think. I wasn't absent. I wasn't harsh. I was imperfect, the way every parent is imperfect. But I loved Melissa, and I showed up, and I tried. But somewhere, somehow, she had grown into someone capable of what she did, and I will carry the weight of not knowing exactly where that happened, or why, for the rest of my life. Not as guilt. I've made my peace with the fact that adult people make their own choices, but as something quieter, a question without an answer, a room in the house of my heart that stays mostly closed. I do not hate my daughter. I'm not sure I know how to explain that to people who expect me to, but it's the truth. What she did was wrong. It was criminal. It nearly cost me the person I love most in the world. And she will have to live with that knowledge every day for the rest of her life, which, in some ways, is a heavier sentence than any courtroom could have handed down. But she is still my daughter, and I am still her father. And whatever comes next, whatever she does with the choices still in front of her, that truth doesn't change. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you. Because the hardest thing isn't the betrayal. The hardest thing is deciding what to do with who you are afterward. On the first warm Saturday in April, Laura and I drove over to the Cedarwood Veterans Family Foundation on Marsh Road. It wasn't a grand event, no ceremony, no crowd. Just the two of us, sitting in the director's office with a check and the simple paperwork needed to establish a small annual gift in both of our names. The director, a former Navy officer named Gerald Chase, shook both of our hands. "This means more than you know," he said. "We know," Laura said. We drove home through the afternoon light. Laura had the window down and her hand resting on the door, the way she always does when she's content. The radio was playing something old and easy. I thought about the young man I'd been at 22, shipping out for the first time, not knowing what was coming. I thought about the years of service, the years of building, the years of Laura. I thought about everything that had tried to break us and hadn't. And I thought about what Thomas had said to me near the end of it all, over coffee in his kitchen. "Ed, you did everything right. You kept your head. You protected your wife. You let the system work." "I just did what needed doing," I'd told him. That's what right looks like, he said. Most people can't manage it. I don't know if I agree with that. I think most people, pushed to what I was pushed to, would find their way to the same place. I think most people love the people they love with more resilience than they know they have until they have to find out. What I know is this. The house is quieter now than it used to be. There's an absence in it that has a shape, a specific weight. I suspect there always will be. Some losses don't fill in. They just become part of the architecture. But there's also this. The sound of Laura's voice from the kitchen on a Saturday morning, the rocking chair on the back porch, the wood shop, the long walks in the blue coat, the check that went to a place that helps people who gave everything they had for something larger than themselves. There's this. We are still here. And after everything, after every question and every answer, and every day that asked more of me than I thought I could give, that is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Real family is the people who actually want you there. What would you have done?